Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smart Audio Report for 2019 from NPR and Edison Research. I'm Tom Webster, the Senior Vice President of Edison Research, and I'm joined today by Joel Zuckerman, who's the Vice President of New Platform Partnerships for NPR. Hey, Joel.
What's going on, Tom?
Well, I'm going to tell you what's going on, Joel. The Smart Audio Report. We've got a lot of great data coming up for you, some great video. First of all, I want to remind people that we will be doing a live Q&A at the end of this webinar. If you have questions, you can either submit them through the GoToMeeting interface, and Joel and I will get to them towards the end, or we have a hashtag. Of course, we have a hashtag. You can hit us up on Twitter. The hashtag is Smart Audio Report. Joel and I will also be monitoring those questions, and we'll take them at the end of this particular webinar. So we're excited to be here and excited to do that. And I'm excited, Joel, that you're here, not just because you're handsome and talented, but because in your role
that's important
at NPR,
too.
It's gotten me far.
Okay.
Well, actually, neither 0 for 2. But it has gotten us to some point in life. But more to the point, you actually work with this technology every single day.
Right. From the very beginning, smart speakers were existential for NPR. The idea that these new beautiful radios showed up in people's homes in the millions almost overnight were a great way for people to just do basic things like listen to live station streams, to listen to podcasts, any on-demand content through NPR One. And so we wanted to make sure that the basics were available with simple utterances that people could remember, like play NPR.
So we've been working with NPR for the past 3 years on what we're going to call the longest running survey series on smart speakers. I think that's fair at this point. We started actually in 2017 with a study at about this time then of smart speaker owners and smart speaker non-owners. We have done 3 such studies in the past 3 years. And we've also done a couple of studies over the past 2 holiday seasons. We've actually foolhardily conducted research in between Christmas and New Year's to get a holiday estimate of the number of people who got one of these devices either for the first time or maybe got a second or third device under their Christmas tree or menorah or pagan present pole, whatever device delivers their presents to them. So there are 3 different studies that we're going to look at today. We're going to start with just a couple of things from the last holiday ownership estimate, which is based on a national telephone survey that we did in between Christmas and New Year's of 1,000 people. Then we're going to look at the results of 2 different online surveys that we recently completed. One with a little over 800 smart speaker owners, and we're going to look at some of their attitudes about these devices. And then another one with 829 people who don't own a smart speaker, and we'll take a look at why they don't own one. What's wrong with them, Joel? Or what some of the possible legitimate objections might be to owning these devices. And then finally, we did some ethnographic research where we actually kind of moved in with people legally, not in a way that would incur a restraining order. But we moved in with people to watch them use these devices and watch them interact with smart speakers and voice assistant technology. And there's some really fascinating insights there, which we can't wait to show you. So let's kick things off by looking at how many people own one of these devices. And this is from our most recent holiday ownership estimate, just from the last holiday season. 21% of Americans 18 plus tell us they own at least one of these devices. That's about 53 million people. And in fact, 14 million of them got their first smart speaker over the last holiday season. But that's not actually the most impressive stat that we learned from that estimate. Kind of the coolest stat, I think, is the percentage of people who own more than one of these devices. Today, if you own a smart speaker, chances are you own at least 2 smart speakers. In fact, the mean is about 2, and 52% of the people who own one of these devices own at least 2, and 30% say they own 3 or more. I've only got 1, Joel. How many do you have in your house?
Well, admittedly, I have 5 of them, and they do different jobs in different rooms of the house.
What's interesting about that is not just what it reveals about you, Joel, but what you just said. It does in fact place these devices in multiple rooms of the house. It places a radio or an audio device in multiple rooms of the house, where in many houses that's not there at the moment. And so that's providing an opportunity to consume audio in multiple rooms of the house.
That's right. And in some settings, it's more of a group setting, more of a family setting. Others, it's more personal, alone time, or going to bed, getting up in the morning. So, I think the usage context is very important as to how I use them.
So when we look at the percentage of people that have bought one of these devices and how that's grown, and also the number of devices that they own, this results in a growth year over year of about 80% in terms of the actual number of devices in people's homes, both in the growth of the people who own them, but that they're putting more than one in their home. So we've gone from about 67 million devices in American homes last year to nearly 119 million devices in people's homes. And certainly one of the things that has driven this growth is not just the advent of kind of cheaper devices, and we've seen things like the Google Mini and the Amazon Dot and things like that, but also newer technology such as screens, video screens built into these devices. And the smart speaker owners that we talked to in our most recent online survey, 27% said they own one of each at least, and 4% say they own one that has just the screen only. And there's a couple things at play here. Certainly, number one, the Echo Show has been out for a little while and people have been buying that. But Google's offerings here are also really, really compelling. I think they've done a very good job with the Google Hub. So these things are starting to drive even more interest in smart speakers.
I think that's right. And we initially thought of the screen devices as companion to the audio in the same way that maybe when you're busy in the middle of things that you may glance at the television and then move on and just listen to the audio of the TV while you start your day. But I think as the voice assistants begin to be built more and more into other smart devices, Fire TV, for example, I think it's going to open up a lot of possibilities for pure video and for other creative uses of visual and audio accompaniment.
And they're certainly driving interest amongst people who already have perhaps an audio-only device. When we ask people how interested they would be in purchasing one of these video-enabled smart speakers like the Echo Show or the Google Home Hub, for people that already have a smart speaker, 29% said, yeah, I'm interested, which is a little more than twice the percentage of people who don't own a smart speaker. And one of the things that video-enabled smart speakers are really driving here is enhanced discovery. And this is something that we hear about a lot, discovering what the devices can do, discovering new skills. Amongst the people who own a video-enabled smart speaker, 2/3 tell us that the screen on their smart speaker has made it easier to discover new content. And again, 2/3 tell us that having a screen on their smart speaker makes it easier to use. So it doesn't sort of eliminate the voice assistant technology. It enhances it. It allows people really to get a better sense of what these devices can do and to visualize that discovery a little bit more, because discovery remains a challenge. When we ask people how they discover new skills or actions for their smart speaker, the number one answer here, as it often is in a discovery question, is recommendations from friends or family. But if you think about it, it's probably not a thing that you talk to your friends and family about very often. Probably not in your dinner time conversation all that often, even though it's the number one reason here. And about 1/3 of smart speaker owners tell us that they learn about these things from emails from the device manufacturers themselves, like Amazon, Google, and sometimes Apple, which I don't know about you, Joel, but I don't find those as helpful.
They've become long lists of things that you can do, and if you can make your way through it, you find little nuggets here and there.
So it is harder to discover new things, but in some cases, people aren't always necessarily looking to discover new things. And that's one of the things that we learned as we talk to people in our ethnographic research who have had these devices, and some of these folks have had these devices for a while. So let's hear how they discover new skills and how important that even is to the people who own smart speakers and smart speaker-enabled devices.
Having the app is I think that's really one of the best features, because you can find out, whatever is going on. And, if there's any updates, if there's this, if there's that. I love that. Some people don't know what to ask a smart speaker because they don't know the capability of it. So I probably use it a little less now, because now I have the idea of what the capabilities are.
The app, not so much. Yeah, I set up all the stuff through the app and then pretty much just let that. I didn't need to go into it again.
Never thought about it. And now you just asked me that question. I'm like, why didn't I use that with my other apps? I don't know. I just never thought of it.
I don't even know where it is. It's buried and there it is. I never use it.
I'm generally going to ask first, because that's the easiest way.
just to like, hey Alexa, can you do this? And then she'll say, if she doesn't, she'll refer you. She will say, hey, go to the app, follow, and do it this way. But it's always easier because it's less steps, and just simply just ask Alexa, hey, can you do this?
The speaker itself gives you suggestions. Like a couple days ago, I got a wrap up of here's what I've used it for, and then here's some other things that I could do. I would prefer it to tell me, because I'm more apt to then do them because it has my attention at that moment, versus having to remember to go into the app to see what I can do.
We've had it for about 5 or 6 months, so we're still fairly new to it, messing around with it, but I like to go on YouTube and stuff like that and see other things that she can do and stuff, so, and find out how to use her better.
I mean, I've looked up a few times like YouTube videos and stuff and watched like, oh, these are 10 things you didn't know you could do with your smart speaker. And it's like, yeah, that is 10 things I didn't know I could do. That's 10 things that I would never do with my smart speaker. My brother got one of these like when they first came out, and that's all we did was just sit around asking it dumb, stupid, nonsense questions. But I think after a while, the fascination wears off, and we just use it for practical things.
Right now, no, we don't test it out as much, but when we have new people and we first got it, we always try to ask it crazy questions, try to stump it, try to ask it, silly things, by trial error saying, oh, can it do this, can it do that, ask it this.
I would say that like experimenting I do less. I think in the beginning we were just like using her nonstop, but now it's just like more routine questions and things. I don't think I experiment much anymore.
We're comfortable now. Alexa doesn't care that much anymore. She's comfortable. She has a spot in the house. If she was human, she'd have a toothbrush. We're good now. We're not in the courting stage anymore.
Wow, so the courtship is over, Joel. We're not in the courting stage anymore.
It really shows the importance of making yourself indispensable in somebody's life so that they don't have to think about asking for something, they just do.
Well, the people that we talk to certainly agree that they don't know enough about their smart speaker to use all of its features. And also that theme of the courtship is over is something we're going to come back to because discovery is a challenge on these devices. And educating people about what a certain skill does or why they would even need a skill is a challenge for all kinds of brands.
That's right, and even if they know skills exist in the world, right? So you think about the average person that may have gotten a smart speaker as a gift, and they set it up on their counter and maybe do a couple of things that the initial info card says that they can do. And then what? It's like the old days of the command line prompt, the blinking cursor that stares at you with intimidation from the screen in the early days of PCs. It's an intimidating thing to have this thing and not know exactly what you can and should do with it.
Absolutely. It is a truly blank canvas, especially if you have one without a screen. And yet people are doing things with them, and we're going to talk about what some of those things are. One of the things that voice assistant technology enables, of course, is the ability to do some of these things while you're doing other things. It's a true companion device and certainly enables multitasking. We ask people a whole range of things. In a typical week, do you ever do these things while you're using your smart speaker? And certainly doing chores, cooking, getting ready for their day, even watching TV. And we've certainly have research in the Smart Audio Report in the past that shows substitutive behavior, where people are actually using their smart speaker in place of TV. You think about that passive TV consumption you might have perhaps in the morning while you're getting ready for work. Well, they're also telling us they're using it while they're watching TV, perhaps to answer questions like who was that actor and why did they do this awful movie and things like that. But people are using these devices while they're doing a whole range of things. And the things that they're doing with them, as we've mentioned before in previous iterations of the Smart Audio Report, it's kind of a litany of the mundane, right? The number one reason is to play music at 77%, but right up there, to get the weather, to answer a general question, all essentially tied with playing music, which is ostensibly the first use case for getting things. But people are using these devices for a whole range of things, really kind of everyday activities, right?
And then I think speaks to the utility of them, and that they have found their ways into our lives, and we do the most basic things to make our lives just a little bit better. And then I think that, again, that next step is what are the amazing things? People are thrilled and fascinated when they're able to turn on and off the lights with devices. And so, what are those things that we're going to find IoT or other reasons to really get excited about the devices?
Now, you might not get excited about the fact that they can listen to audio, because that, again, is the reason why most people buy these.
I get very excited about that.
Well, you do. Actually, I do too. Both our breads are buttered in that way. So yes, maybe we're excited about it. But most people who own these devices do agree that they're listening to more audio since they got a smart speaker. 55% agree with that. And whether that may or may not seem exciting to you, for some people, it's enabling them to plug into their passions. It's enabling them to plug into not just music that they like, but also news, information, sports, perhaps catching up with a hometown. And we've got a great example of that and we're sorry about this if you're out there, someone that we're labeling the Fanatic in only the most loving of terms, of someone who is able to use their smart speaker to connect more with their favorite sports team through all kinds of different forms of audio, including podcasts. So let's meet our friend, the Fanatic.
We have 5 children. The reason why you're wondering why I'm stuttering is that we have 4 children and one is a foster baby who will be leaving next week or the week after. I only have so much time if it's alone. Like, for example, if I'm cooking in the morning, there's a little bit of time before they all come down and want to eat. And so I know I can have that time to myself. I started listening to podcasts because I would listen to ESPN radio, and basically it's just archives of the shows. And then they would advertise these podcasts, 30 for 30 or Sports Wars or whatever, and there's different personalities. And you would go on the ESPN app and look at the different shows, and those are podcasts.
Alexa, play Mina Kimes podcast.
Here's the Mina Kimes show featuring Lenny from iHeartRadio. Thank you. Cool your jets. The Mina Kimes show featuring Lenny is presented by ZipRecruiter.
I don't know, it's just in my mind, when I'm home it's more Alexa, when I'm out during the day it's my phone, and Alexa is at home. And so now I'm like, oh, I don't have to just listen to music, I can listen to a podcast. Now I have that opportunity where if I was just listening to my phone, I wouldn't at home.
Alexa, fast forward.
Controlling the content is the most important part. For example, my ESPN app, it'll have a show and it'll have the different guests, and I can fast forward to those guests that I wanted to. I need to be able to control it, and I only have like 15 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, and then I know I can get this information in. But if you have to listen to the 30-minute part, not gonna happen.
Savannah, Sierra, JJ, dinner.
This is beyond my wildest dreams.
So you said fandom? What fandom? What are you talking about? I got this yesterday at a flea market, and a buddy of mine got me this. And this is my son's. He's not allowed to sleep in this house unless he's a Cowboy fan. So that's his.
We had to show you the full Kyle because he was fantastic. And he's really learned how to use a variety of features on his smart speaker to discover audio, right? And there's a lot of interactivity now that's possible with these kinds of devices.
That's right. If you think about, he talked about the control in his hands to be able to fast forward, to be able to skip through to parts that he really wants to listen to, which makes it him more efficient and a better use of his time.
So it's not just for listening to audio, it's also to do things that are maybe a little more futuristic. 27% of smart speaker owners tell us they use their smart speaker to control household devices at least weekly. And the interesting thing about these people is that they're kind of different dogs in the sense that they do a lot more with their speakers than most people. The average number of skills that people use is quite a bit less than this. We'll get to that a little bit later. But if you are someone who controls household devices with your smart speaker, you do an average of 16 different skills per week with your smart speaker or your voice assistant enabled device. So the people who are using this kind of technology, they're really using these devices to the utmost to really discover all of the possible things that they can do. And there's no better example of that than this next person who is using it to control basically his entire life.
I was moving in here and I was like, man, I want something cool. So I started off with the Philips Hue lights that change colors, and then someone in Best Buy was like, man, if you buy this with that, then you can talk to it and control the lights, and you can change colors and do all these cool things. So I just brought the whole thing together just to have that smart home experience. Alexa, turn living room lights on.
Okay.
I used to watch a show called Eureka. I don't know if you guys remember, sci-fi. That show was amazing. The smart house that they had, everything that they can do, food just popping up out of the counter, freshly made. And I'm like, man, I would love to have a smart home. Having the Alexa kind of gave me a piece of that. Alexa, turn living room lights white.
Okay.
Not only is it a good party trick, but it's also just amazing to set your own mood by voice. Alexa, turn my lights blue. Alexa, turn on jazz. Things like that. I want to get to a point where I can tell Alexa, turn on my TV and turn on the fireplace from YouTube. And all of a sudden the fireplace comes on, and then the jazz and then the lights and everything, because it's a mood that you're setting. I would love to be able to walk in and Alexa just knows that I'm here and she's like, what up, Rob? That would be, that would be my voice of my Alexa. She'd be like, what up, Rob? How's it going? I'm like, man, life is good. Alexa, play Jay-Z radio from Sonos.
Jay-Z Radio from Pandora. Playing on Sonos.
I remember, I think it was a book I was reading. I want to say it was Henry Ford. The statement was, everything that can be created or invented has been. That was like in the 1800s or something. So, I'm looking forward to the future. I'm looking forward to it. I just want to be in a position to where I can take full advantage of it when I get there.
So if we were using this technology right now, Joel, we would set the mood to sterile white conference room.
with hum of the fluorescent lights and the AC.
It's working.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It's nice. I like it.
So he's using these devices to control all kinds of things. And really, the only limit with these devices is your imagination, or at least what you're willing to let these devices do. For instance, when we ask people, how would you be interested in having a feature that would allow your smart speaker to call 911 if multiple smoke alarms went off in your house, 55% of smart speaker owners we talked to agreed with that, which is it's kind of a cool feature, I think. Some people, of course, may have qualms about that, which we'll get to, but this is really verging into the territory of science fiction. In fact, this one really is sort of science fiction to me. About a quarter expressed interest in having a smart speaker feature that would recommend mental health resources if it detected that you're feeling depressed or suicidal. And I know we've talked in the past about monitoring, perhaps for elderly parents and things like that, but this is really kind of a next level thing here. And 1 in 4 of the smart speaker owners that we talk to say that that would be actually kind of cool, that they would be okay with that. But there's, of course, the flip side to that, and that is people do worry about the amount of information that these devices are learning about us. And if not the devices, then at least, as in this particular stat, the humans who could hack into these devices. 58% of smart speaker owners worry that hackers could be using their smart speaker to get access to their home or personal information. And this is, of course, a legitimate concern, because if it is online, it can be hacked, which brings us really to a whole discussion on privacy. We talked to a number of smart speaker owners about their relationship with these devices in terms of their personal data, who can access their personal data, and just how secure they may feel in having these devices listening all the time.
I don't actually have too many concerns. I feel like the world we live in right now, we don't really have privacy. We may feel like we do, which is fine, but we don't.
I'm not concerned at all. So they're listening. What are they going to hear? They're going to hear me talking to the cat or the dog. They're not going to hear any national secrets. I don't really care.
I don't think I have anything like to hide, really. I feel like maybe I trust too much. I don't know, but no, I'm not concerned.
My trust meter is up there. I guess that's why she's referred to as my girlfriend, as my wife would say. I trust it a lot. I haven't had any fraud or anything like that happen, so I have my trust is pretty high with Amazon, so I'm cool with them.
I think it's a little creepy to know that like your conversations are potentially being recorded and used and whatnot, and you know, if it's always listening. But at the same time, like, I don't really care. Like, I have friends and people that talk about the speakers, like, they're concerned that people are listening and this and that. It's like, we've been carrying around a speaker in our pockets for the better part of the last 20 years. Like, you're worried about this new device, that's the one to be concerned about?
I actually used to have Siri off the whole time. Using the Echo Dot made me more comfortable with Siri, so now I have it enabled on my smartphone. I guess I'm just not as concerned about the privacy issues anymore.
You don't like some of the stuff, just like, you know, people can, you know, your boss can see where you're surfing or whatever. You know, you don't like it, but you know, you're not doing anything crazy. So it is challenging. It's just that it's part of where we are. The most important part is it doesn't have a video to it. That's the biggest thing. If it had a video to it, then that would be huge, because that could be, you know, see things and stuff like that. But so it's not as bad.
Play the Bloomberg podcast. Sorry, that's freaky. I wish you wouldn't have told me that. That's weird. I think my anxiety kicked in a little bit. It's a little warm. Okay, so in all transparency, I didn't want one for the longest because, like I said, I don't necessarily like to feel like something is listening to me all the time. But then the other side is like, what can you really do about it? And I like my smart devices. I like technology. So it's like, what can you really do about it?
So there's really a couple things going on here. First of all, there's this prevailing sense that we don't really have privacy anyway. And a lot of the smart speaker owners that we talk to are just kind of resigned to the fact that everything's listening, everything's keylogging, everything is getting our information all the time anyway. So maybe this is not that different. But there's a second element here, which is actually people do trust these devices a little bit more. And this stat I found kind of remarkable, Joel. 54% of smart speaker owners trust the companies that make the smart speakers to keep their personal information secure, which in sort of today's age with company trust and things like that, that's kind of a remarkable stat, but it brings up a whole lot of issues like brand safety, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an extension of the handshake agreement that I, as an individual, am willing to give up a certain amount of personal data for functionality that makes my life better, right? I'm willing to allow Google Maps to know exactly where I am in relation to something else because I can get there now, either walking or driving. And so you're willing to give up a certain amount of data and privacy for something that actually makes your life better. I also think it does give us in the voice first space an opportunity to really ensure that we are underlining those values and that we don't that we keep the trust of the individuals first and foremost as we continue to produce content or whatever we're doing to help people make better use out of the voice assistant, whether it's smart speaker or it's on the go, in the car, on their phones.
And of course, a really key aspect of that trust that is so, as we know, important to the device manufacturers and the operating systems that they're using are stats like this. 3/4 of smart speaker owners with children in the house use these devices daily. And in fact, their kids are using these devices. Their children are asking these devices questions. Maybe questions that Dad doesn't want to answer, but Alexa does. And so having that element of trust when you know that children could be using it, who knows who could be using these devices in the home. But this kind of daily use with children and with family usage and with details and data and things like that, that trust element becomes super important.
Because, you know, with kids, the great thing is there's no fear, right? They're going to just jump right in and start asking questions, whatever they want to know. Whereas, you know, as adults, we may have a little bit more, you know, barriers up that might prevent us from doing certain things. Kids just will jump right in. They love the new technology.
Maybe you do, Joel, but I have no filter whatsoever. So, in terms of the interest that people have in these devices who don't own one, certainly that trust element and the privacy element, those things are important considerations when we talk to the people who don't own a smart speaker. As I mentioned at the beginning, we did talk to 829 people who don't own a smart speaker, and we asked them how interested they would be in perhaps owning one someday. And there's still interest here. If you look at the 4s and the 5s, which we typically like to combine for something like this, about 20% of the people who don't own a smart speaker tell us that they are, in fact, interested in one. And when you break that out demographically, there is a real story here. Amongst 18 to 34-year-old non-owners, 26% say, yeah, they're interested in perhaps owning one someday. 29% of 35 to 54-year-olds who don't own a smart speaker say they're interested in one. And 9% of 55 plus are interested in one. So clearly the smart speaker story has not been fully expressed to 55 plus in the way that it has 18 to 54. And there are also some real objections there with 55 and older. But one thing I can tell you about people who don't own a smart speaker is they're not Luddites. They're not afraid of technology. In fact, when we ask people, do you ever use the voice-operated personal assistant on your smartphone? 80% of smart speaker owners said, yeah, they do. But over half of those who don't own a smart speaker say they do, which I would submit is a pretty robust number. So these people are using technology, and they are, in fact, more than half comfortable with voice assistant technology. So they are using it.
I think it's then making the argument as to why a smart speaker would be useful to that population.
Absolutely right. Making the case to those people, making the case to that demographic. But there are also some real objections to overcome here, which we'll get to in just a moment. 20% of those who don't own a smart speaker, as I mentioned before, say they're interested in one. But amongst those who do use the voice assistant on their phone already, 31% say they're interested in owning a smart speaker. So as we saw in some of the video earlier, using the voice assistant on your phone can be a bit of a gateway drug to interest in using a smart speaker or other kind of device with voice assistant technology. But it also works the other way, and we have talked to plenty of people who began using the voice assistant on their phone after they discovered smart speakers and began to be comfortable with that technology. Now, there are, as I mentioned, some legitimate obstacles and objections for people who want to buy these speakers but maybe haven't taken the plunge, or with people that have no interest whatsoever in owning one of these speakers. Really, this is the principal one, and Joel just touched on it. 60% of those who don't own a smart speaker agree they just don't need that type of technology in their lives. And you know, for a lot of these people, that's flat out true. I mean, this is not necessarily something that you need in your life until you've got it in your life. Isn't that true?
That's right. Any new technology, right? If you're not an early adopter, it's not necessarily something that you see a crying need for, a big hole in your life. But once you have it, you start to see the convenience. For most people, not everybody.
And we all didn't need home broadband either until we did. And we all didn't need a smartphone until we did. So certainly this kind of technology can't sneak up on you. I mentioned a couple years ago, back in 2017, that we talked to non-smart speaker owners, and we asked for some of their objections. And back then, the number one objection was that voice-enabled speakers were too expensive, which may have been true in mid-2017 when we first asked this question. But that objection has certainly gone down. And we're going to track here this list of objections amongst people who don't own one, but have an interest. That 20% who say they are interested in owning a smart speaker, they just haven't pulled the plug yet. What are some of the reasons why they do not own one? And there's been some real movement here over the past couple of years. The expense issue has gone down, certainly. But what has gone up? You worry that hackers could use smart speakers to get access to your home or personal information. That's gone up a lot. It bothers you that smart speakers are always listening. That's gone up a lot. What's gone down a lot is the one at the bottom. You just don't understand what a voice-enabled smart speaker is. So we're sort of less able to claim ignorance or a lack of education here. People know what this technology does. As we mentioned, many of them are using it on their phones already. But there are some legitimate concerns here about the use of personal information and that these devices are always listening. But what's interesting here, Joel, and this is something you and I talked about before, is it's not just non-owners that have these concerns, right? Smart speaker owners and non-owners alike worry about the same things. If you look at the percentage of smart speaker owners who worry that hackers could use that info, it's nearly identical to that of non-smart speaker owners. And if the one at the bottom, you worry that your smart speaker could allow the government to listen to your private conversations, that's even higher with smart speaker owners than it is with non-owners. So these are legitimate complaints, but some people are just okay with that.
What strikes me is if those numbers are similar between owners and non-owners, that it's just the case hasn't been made yet for the non-owners in ways that this is an indispensable part of your life. And I don't know what it will take. Maybe it will be as voice assistants become more ubiquitous in the car. That might be one reason that folks might be more interested in buying one, or not. They may move on to a new technology.
Absolutely. So we talked to somebody who was one of these reluctant adopters, someone who had some of these objections. Certainly privacy was one, not knowing why they would need such a device was another. But eventually she bit the bullet and she bought one of these devices. And here's what she had to say about it.
The smart speaker I own is the Echo Dot. I almost called it the Alexa, but it's the Echo Dot.
What did the horse say to the scarecrow?
What?
Hey.
Hey! It was a gift. It was a Christmas present, and I actually didn't open it for a really long time. I just didn't get around to it, and I thought, oh, I don't, like, what do I need a smart speaker for? What is it actually going to do to help me or to simplify things? And then once I did open it and started playing with it, it was so much fun. And I thought, why didn't I open this earlier?
Alexa, play dog bark sounds.
You have Jurassic Bark enabled. Do you want to open it?
Yes.
I said, Alexa, are you spying on me? Because I think that was one of the reasons why I was kind of hesitant, because I thought it was weird to have something that was listening to me all the time.
Alexa, play Audible.
Getting your selection from Audible. Resuming the Clockmaker's Daughter.
How much he loved staying at the house, and how gratifying it was to have the opportunity
Alexa,
to get to know
turn
him.
volume up. I think I just relaxed a little more because I just got used to it, and it is so common now, and so many people have smart speakers that I just think like, okay, I haven't heard anything, any serious bad things happening. So I think I was just more comfortable knowing that there were so many other people using the same kind of device.
Alexa, stop. Alexa, thank you.
You bet.
I love that.
So objections can be overcome, and as a result, people just like her use these devices every single day. 69% of smart speaker owners tell us that they use their device daily. Before we continue here, I want to remind people that the hashtag for this webinar is #SmartAudioReport. And Joel and I are going to be taking your questions live. If you want to tweet them to us, you can tweet them with that hashtag. You can use the GoToMeeting interface to ask them, and we're going to be taking your questions live. And please do not use the name of one of these devices in your question, or things are going to go haywire here at NPR Central. One thing about these devices is, and we've seen this throughout the course of the entire Smart Audio Report series that we have done in partnership with NPR, is that people continue to use these devices more often. The percentage of people who say that they use them more often now than they used to is about twice the percentage of people who say they use them less often. So people are using them with frequency, but that doesn't mean that they're doing lots and lots of different activities. It could just mean that they're doing the same activities more often or even fewer activities, but just with some frequency. And that's in fact something that we saw relevant to the amount of time that people have these devices in their home. And it seems odd to say this, Joel, but nearly 20% of smart speaker owners tell us that they've had the device in their home for more than 2 years. And I know you've been focused on them for more than 2 years. Any perspective over that period of time and how things have changed with how people use them that you see?
Well, it reminds me of smartphone use, where initially you would download app after app and just try out new things, but ultimately you end up with one screen of apps that you use. And so I think it's a maturation of the industry that there may be fewer actions or skills that you're using, but you're using them more.
Yeah, absolutely. And that using them more and the variety of skills that you use really is a function of how long you've had the device in your home. And this is a super clear explication of that. This is the average number of skills used on a smart speaker in the past week, sorted by the length of time that the sample has owned the smart speaker. If you've had your smart speaker for 3 months or less, you do an average of almost 12 different things a week with it. Again, that's listening to music, that could be listening to news or podcasts or controlling lights. If you've had it for 3 to 6 months, you do a little bit less. 6 months to less than a year, you do a little under 10, same as a year to 2 years. And if you've had your device for 2 years or more, you do about 7 things, 7 different skills with it every week. So just as you said, Joel, as these devices become more and more a part of your life, maybe you're not doing as many different things. Maybe you're not constantly adding new apps to it in the same way that you don't with your smartphone. And so you might think that this means the devices are less important to people's lives, but that's not true at all. In fact, the reverse is true, and this may seem counterintuitive. When we ask people, do you agree or disagree, you wouldn't want to go back to life without your smart speaker, look at how the length of ownership contributes to this question. If you just got your smart speaker, 11% agree that they wouldn't want to go back to life without that smart speaker. Oh, those short 2 or 3 months ago. But as the length of time that people own these devices goes up, they're more likely to agree that they wouldn't want to go back to life without it. And even though they may not necessarily be adding every hot new skill every week, perhaps because they don't know about every hot new skill each week, the devices have become more and more ingrained into their everyday life. And as such, if you've had these devices in your home for a while, you become a sort of pragmatist about them. And in this last video that we're going to show you here today, it's a great example of what a pragmatist looks like who's owned one of these smart speakers for some time now.
I go to Columbia University in New York, and I just got off of break for the summer, so I'm back in St. Louis doing some work.
Okay, Google, when did James Crick discover DNA?
On the website dna-worldwide.com, they say,
When I first got the Google Home, it was kind of a novelty device. I would ask it, curious things, but now I'm much more using it in a student perspective with adding things to my calendar, adding things to my to-do list. People are using it kind of as an entertainment device, which is I've learned pretty much not how to use it over the years.
Okay, Google, what is the weather today?
right now in Grantwood Village, it's 87 and partly cloudy. Today, it'll be partly cloudy with a forecasted high of 89 and a low of 66.
When I wake up, I try to hear the most information as possible just to start my day. I have a setting that wakes me up with the latest from NPR's podcast from the day before, so I get kind of a briefing.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Hurst. Amid an intense sanctions campaign from the White House.
There were different settings on what you could have play. It could be music, it could be a radio, AM, FM station. It's just NPR just because, through trial and error, it's the one that I think gives the most broad overview of what's happened since I last, awoke. And so I've been doing that for a few months now, and I really like it.
Relations between the White
Okay,
House
Google.
and the government.
Stop.
On average, usually listen to about 5 minutes, and then I'm on my way.
All right, there are hundreds and hundreds of you on this, and we've gotten some great questions. So it's time to field some of them, I think. What do you think, Joel?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. First question that we have here is, this is from Charlie Meyerson, who writes, smart speaker manufacturers need to up their email communication game, right? Audio advances aside, email is still an essential communication channel. And I think he's referring here to that discovery issue. Joel, you want to speak to that?
Sure. And I think it depends upon where that communication happens and where the proximity to your actual device too, because it's hard to remember to go back to something hours after you've received an email. So the first thing I'd say is that the discovery is not solely the responsibility of the technology companies. Certainly it would be easier if there's a more visual friendly interface that can help us find things that might fit in our lives. So I think, sadly, the first step is to use your own existing channels to let people know about it. But I recognize also that there's until there's a better operation around the notifications, it's hard to make sure that you maintain the habitual use from users, that you maintain a habit in people's lives.
Another question we have is, how can audio-based businesses index their market share on content through smart speakers? And I think the answer, Joel, is you can't right now, right? I mean, you see your stats from NPR.
That's right. We're not indexing ourselves against the overall news industry. We're just taking a look at the kinds of metrics that are important to us across all of our different parts of the business. For example, total listening hours for us, whether it's on radio or whether it's on a smart audio device, is something that you can benchmark against one another.
Randall writes in, sound lost, and while that may refer to a problem with the webinar, I prefer to think of it as he just witnessed a great battle.
Is it Lord of the Flies kind of thing?
Kind of thing, yeah. I think sound's doing okay. Charlie Meyerson writes in, litany of the mundane is a great phrase. Thank you, Charlie. I'm a Webster, and thus the words all belong to my family at some point. I want to address this. TJ wrote in, this kind of feels like an ad for smart speakers, which, to be fair, he wrote in early on when there were certainly a lot of positive things. But I think we've learned a couple of things from this round of research. One is, which I'll just address really quickly, is that the privacy and security concerns are really, really there. And, to some extent, we've become numb to that because, everything is listening. The phone that's in your pocket is, well, that's a nightmare if you really want to break it down. But there are absolutely hard concerns with privacy and security with these devices. But also, I think, especially as we got towards the end with the sort of the pragmatist that we showed, and how people, the more that they own these devices, are using them for fewer and fewer things, even though they may do those things a lot. And maybe that speaks, Joel, to perhaps a lack of innovation.
Yeah, and I think that we're really moving, I think, from phase 1 to phase 2 of the world. And we have to think that this is still an industry in its infancy. And for those old enough to remember, in the 1970s, you might be watching a football game from the West Coast, and all of a sudden the picture would go down, and it would come up with audio only, and then the picture would come back. The internet, how many people can remember dial-up and the limitations of that? And I think that's where we are right now with voice devices, that we want so much more from them, or we expect a lot more, and I think we'll be getting them. Some of the things that are in the area of innovation right now are sort of novelties. Some of the gaming things that are happening, some of the companions to movie releases might be sort of in the novelty category, but I do think that will lead to utility in the coming months and years.
Amy writes in, were there any geographic skews of users, coasts, cities? We didn't break them out in this. The only thing I can tell you is that when we conduct online research, as this was an online sample, it uses a stratified sample that is weighted across a number of issues to make it as representative of the online population as possible. So it would not have any more of a bias than the actual population has. Charlotte writes in, do you have any insights into smart speakers in cars? And I know, Joel, you and I have both been to CES. it's certainly in practice, there aren't so many because we don't buy new cars all that often. But Joel, you've seen some things. You've
Right.
seen things.
I've seen things. In some ways, you can go back 10 years now, where the introduction of voice in the car, the Ford Sync platform. But I think now our expectations are greater, right? It's not just call home. It's not just play this thing. Now we're getting used to controlling, having much more control with our voices. And I think you've got the Echo Auto from Amazon coming out. You've got built-in voice assistants. Google has been demonstrating at the last two Google I/O conferences. So it is coming. It's just going to happen slowly because, in general, the average age of the fleet is about 11.5 years. And so the turnover for the electronics in the car, the vehicle infotainment systems, it just takes a while to get there. But I think the demand is there, and I do think that there are more people making decisions about vehicles based upon technology that it's happening.
Murray writes in, have you been hacked? You sound like a cyborg. And I think the only thing I will say to that, Murray, is that I can successfully pass the Turing test. So if I'm on the other side of a closed door, you won't be able to tell if I'm human or robot. And I think that's a tribute to my programming, I think. Here's a great question. Essie writes in, for brands looking at developing skills or actions for voice, do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how to make customers aware of that functionality or in making the skills or actions sticky?
Let me start. Prior to that, I think one of the things that is always a challenge is putting the audience first and figuring out what holes people have in their lives, what jobs can you do for somebody that somebody else is either not doing at all or not doing very well. So starting with the audience needs is really important. And then in terms of the discovery, I mean, I think we've talked a couple of times about it is really a challenge, and I recognize the fact that we're fortunate to have a national platform with local outlets and hundreds of cities and towns across the United States, and that helps. But I think that it's important to use whatever channels are at your disposal and try to think of context. And sometimes things like snail mail might even be the best way to reach people, because if you think about somebody's going to the mailbox, pulling a letter, bringing it into their kitchen, which is exactly where your smart audio device probably is. And so there are things, creative uses that might not necessarily be cutting-edge technology, but based upon things that already exist. And then the stickiness, some of it is based upon how well can you ingrain yourself in the habits in people's lives, and otherwise, how can you ensure that you're fulfilling something that can't be done in any other way.
Dave Shaw writes in a great question. Do consumers using the speakers for news tend to ask for the news generally, or do they tend to ask specific questions about topics or stories they're interested in?
So that's a really interesting question, one that we've thought a lot about over the last couple of years. I think right now, the answer is they just ask generally for the news, and that's the quickest way to get an update. And then for other things, they may ask, how tall is Tom Cruise, and questions like that might settle the old bar bet kind of things. But I do believe that that day is coming soon, in which people will be more comfortable and by getting better answers from the devices, they'll be more attuned to asking for deeper questions. And you start out with things like, what happened at the Tony Awards last night? What's the latest with the at the Trump White House? And so you start to get a little bit less generic, and then it will, I think, get to a point where people are asking more specific questions. But a lot of work has to go into the back end in terms of indexing content, ingesting audio, tagging it in a way that can be recalled, and it's not a small undertaking.
Here's one I want to field really quickly. Someone wrote in, do you all study how many people are auditory learners versus written word, et cetera, and that pertains to what they retain and how much they enjoy their smart speaker. It turns out that that is a preference and not something that's hardwired. The myth of the visual learner or the audio learner has actually been debunked by our science friends, and it is a preference. You can have that preference, but the brain is malleable, as it turns out. Here's a question: how many people are using smart speakers for podcasts? And I'll take that really quickly. Not as many as could and perhaps should. Podcasting, certainly the Venn diagram of people who listen to podcasts and the people who own a smart speaker, those two circles are fairly close together. They certainly appeal to a very similar type of human. But podcasting lags a little bit on smart speakers. Joel, you want to speak to that?
Sure. I think there's two things going on there. One is the fact that in many cases the podcast listening experience is a very intimate, personal one, and sometimes the smart speaker device is a communal place in the house and a communal experience. But the second part is, I think the numbers are probably a little bit artificially low, partially because we're not able to track listening to podcasts as smart speaker listening when it's when people are Bluetoothing the podcast from their phone, and so I think that that there's probably more that's actually happening, but we're not able to track it as listening via voice assistants.
Here's a great question, and maybe you can speak to some of the things that you're exploring here at NPR on this one. Do you see audio content, music, podcasts, etc., becoming interactive in the future?
I think that there has been over the years many use cases for, well, let me start it differently. There have been many occasions where we as publishers have thought about how we can use the technology, whatever it might be, in interesting ways, but that may not necessarily be what the end user wants. And so I think marrying the need that users have with the ability to do that, I think, is the secret sauce. And sure, I do think that there will be some great opportunities there.
Well, we are right at the top of the hour, and there are still plenty of great questions, which we'll try to sprinkle onto Twitter as we can. The last one that I'll surface here is Brad Hill, who writes, "My Google and Alexa devices were responding to your videos. Thank you for all the products they bought." And Brad, on behalf of NPR and Edison Research, you're welcome. But that is going to wrap things up for the Smart Audio Report 2019. If you want to download any of this, all of this, we'll have the videos, the slides, and more available at npr.org/smartaudio. So on behalf of Joel Zuckerman, the entire team at NPR, and our wonderful team at Edison, who helped put all of this together, thanks for being here.